The story begins at the Kangwu Mountain sect of Dark Spear, a place that could be referred to as the fairyland of Panglai, with a picturesque and poetic landscape. Sky-Peering Peak is located at the summit of the Nether Spear sect and is the most bustling and lively place. Over there, someone was setting up a stall, and they were curious about Zhang Yan. A disciple from the Pavilion of Profound Benevolence was leisurely seated at a stone table, engrossed in reading a book that stated, "The Tao gives birth to one, one gives birth to two, two gives birth to three, three gives birth to all things." This individual looked exceedingly scholarly. Those outside, upon seeing Zhang Yan so diligent, could not help but gossip. They remarked on how ordinary he seemed, with a cultivation level that appeared shallow. What could he possibly know about edible script? Edible script is as difficult as a heavenly tome, an ancient text that has been passed down through the ages. How could he comprehend it? Truly a fraud. Although Zhang Yan was focused on his reading, he could clearly hear their words. He set the book down on the table and thought to himself that life was not easy. Picking up a radiant gem, he continued to ponder that he had been reborn for over 10 days, and not only had his cultivation not progressed, but even making a living was proving to be a struggle. The former owner of this body shared the same name and surname as Zhang Yan. People still referred to the former owner by that name. 10 days ago, after the Kangwu Mountain, the sky had collapsed, and in his past life, Zhang Yan had suddenly found a piece of jade that had fallen from the heavens. The result of being subjected to the mysterious forces of the anti-system was unfortunate, leading to a descent that felt like falling into 8 layers of hell. Zhang Yan, hailing from Earth's future, had endured 7 years of hardship, sacrificing for the purpose of finding a retreat base, which could also be termed heroic. Both individuals carried a strong desire for survival. After being reborn in the body of this young man, Zhang Yan found himself without any background or opportunities, relying solely on a modicum of talent to piece together ancient texts, traversing an elusive and seemingly hopeless path to enlightenment. While Zhang Yan was engrossed in his reading, Zhao Yuan, a disciple of the Moral Training Pavilion, happened to pass by and noticed him. Zhao Yuan approached, teasingly asking, "Your cultivation level is not high, how can you read the edible script?" Zhang Yan calmly replied, "If you don't believe me, why don't you give it a try, Your Excellency?" Zhao Yuan, intrigued, placed a book on the table and said, "I have a copy of the Way book. If you can comprehend it, there will be a significant reward." Zhang Yan took the Way book and replied lightly, "Rest assured, Your Excellency, I've been fortunate enough to read the Immortal Journey Through Water book and I grasp its contents well. I do not need to review it at this moment." Zhao Yuan began to display a skeptical expression, looking at the dry and incomprehensible edible script. "Can you remember it? Afraid of being laughed at?" Zhang Yan didn't have the time to respond to Zhao Yuan, he simply dipped his brush in ink, preparing to write. Before he began, he discreetly pulled a piece of jade from his pocket. The piece of jade could help him think faster, and he needed to use it wisely. Zhao Yuan stood beside him, watching as Zhang Yan elegantly wrote and drew butterflies on the paper, feeling a sense of admiration. Normally, those who read edible script had to use a child's card to interpret it, but this person was reading it directly. The world of the gem has transformed. With a 10-fold increase in thinking speed, Zhang Yan was able to put pen to paper without wasting much time, even writing continuously without pause. After finishing, Zhang Yan rolled up the sheet of paper and presented it, saying, "It's done. Please take a look, Your Excellency." The Immortal Journey Through Water book, which concealed the eternal flow path method, was an exceptionally rare secret method. As Zhao Yuan opened it and read a few lines, he couldn't help but continuously praise the writing. Truly remarkable, very impressive. Zhao Yuan looked at Zhang Yan and began to calculate carefully. This work elaborately explained the order of power, deserving of being considered a top-tier piece. This person possessed extraordinary talent in this aspect. He was definitely not ordinary, and it would be wise to befriend him. With that thought in mind, Zhao Yuan bowed and introduced himself, saying, "I am Zhao Yuan, a disciple of the Moral Training Pavilion." "May I ask your name, senior brother?" Zhang Yan politely replied, "I am Zhang Yan, a disciple of the Pavilion of Profound Benevolence." Zhao Yuan, surprised, continued, "It seems that both of us are disciples of one of the 3 major lower houses here, so we can consider ourselves senior disciples of the same sect." Suddenly, he placed a small jar on the table and said, I came here in haste today and forgot to bring a treasure. This is pure jade sand from the 5 elements divine sand, valued at 2 taels. I hope the junior disciple will accept it.
Zhang Yan nodded and responded, Thank you, Brother Zhao.
Your feelings seem unstable, and your mind appears quite agitated.
Remember not to practice the edible script.
Zhao Yuan promptly nodded in reply, Thank you for your concern, junior disciple. On that evening, Zhang Yan packed his belongings in preparation for his pilgrimage. The reason was quite obvious: apart from Zhao Yuan, no one else was coming anymore, and it was time to carve a path for survival. At that moment, a sudden sound of footsteps approached from afar, and a young girl named Zhaoying appeared before Zhang Yan.
With a sharp tone, she asked, You are Zhang Yan, right? Zhang Yan nodded seriously and replied, That would be me.
Zhaoying abruptly drew her sword and shouted, Today, my senior disciple was practicing the edible script that you explained, and he ended up spitting blood and fainting. It must be your fault, you scammer. Upon hearing this, Zhang Yan frowned and thought to himself, It seems Zhao Yuan didn't heed my advice, he truly is a stubborn one. Even when accused, Zhang Yan remained calm and replied, To determine whether I am a fraud or not, you and I can go to the moral training pavilion and check on Zhao Yuan. Finally, Zhaoying sheathed her sword and said, If anything happens to Brother Jia, I will hold you accountable. After that, both of them returned together to the disciples' quarters at the moral training pavilion.
Zhang Yan sat on Zhao Yuan's bed and examined his condition.
After taking his pulse, Zhang Yan spoke up to diagnose, Brother Zhao's mental state is unstable, and his eagerness to practice the edible script has led to a chaotic flow of energy. Fortunately, it is not too dangerous, he will wake up soon. Zhaoying, upon hearing this, shouted loudly, If Brother Jia doesn't wake up, then you shouldn't even think about leaving here. At that moment, they suddenly heard the sound of the door being flung open. It turns out to be Bian Xiao, the steward of the moral training pavilion, along with a few subordinates, entering with disdainful laughter.
Zhang Yan, you are quite bold.
Zhang Yan pondered deeply. If he remembered correctly, this person was named Bian Xiao, the steward of this place. Normally, aside from managing everything, he also had authority over the disciples in enforcing the law. Bian Xiao stepped forward and mockingly said, You are a disciple of the Pavilion of Profound Benevolence, an outsider who deceives the world for fame, using the understanding of edible script to harm our disciples, so what crime do you deserve?
Zhaoying observed the situation while secretly calculating.
Bian Xiao was not someone easy to provoke. It would be interesting to see how Zhang Yan would handle this. Zhang Yan, of course, remained very calm and replied, The reason Brother Zhao is in a coma is due to improper cultivation, it has nothing to do with me. The Moral Training Pavilion and the Pavilion of Profound Benevolence are part of the same lineage, one of the lower houses of the Netherspear sect.
In Your Excellency's words, how could I have any intention of sowing discord between the sects?
Upon hearing this, Bian Xiao was so furious that he trembled. That Zhang Yan was quite cunning, he never expected to be caught in his own words. He secretly breathed a sigh of relief, grateful that he had prepared early. After thinking for a moment, he reached into his robe to retrieve something. Bian Xiao nonchalantly pulled out 3 volumes of the Wei book and loudly proclaimed, I have always acted according to reason and will not unjustly accuse anyone. Here are 3 volumes of the edible script the Wei book, if you can read them here, I will not hold you accountable. Zhang Yan not only did not refuse but extravagantly agreed, Fine, let's do it your way. Zhaoying looked at the scene before her, unable to contain her astonishment.
How did Zhang Yan have such confidence in interpreting 3 volumes of edible script?
Meanwhile, Bian Xiao stroked his beard and chuckled cunningly, Let's see what you're made of. Zhang Yan, however, remained extremely confident, saying, Today, I must clear my name.
Bian Xiao loudly ordered, Follow me outside to learn more.
With that, both Zhang Yan and Zhaoying, along with the old Bian Xiao, went out to the stone table outside. This rumor quickly spread throughout the disciples' residence, prompting everyone to come over to hear the news.
Some fool, lacking discernment, provoked Bian Xiao.
Thus, a registered disciple of the Pavilion of Profound Benevolence was said to be guilty of deceiving the sect, and he still wanted to prove his innocence while Bian ordered him to read the 3 volumes of edible script right away. The other disciples, upon hearing this, widened their eyes in surprise.
3 volumes, really?
Once everyone had gathered, Bian Xiao spoke loudly, "All esteemed guests present, please bear witness to this, so that when the news spreads, no one can claim that I am bullying others."
The disciples responded excitedly, "Yes, yes."
Seeing Bian's demeanor, Zhang Yan deduced that Bian Xiao must have memorized these 3 volumes of the edible script and was well aware of the secret method. Bian Xiao didn't need to refute this, he simply nodded in agreement, "That's right." Zhang Yan picked up 1 volume of the Wei book and said, "If that's the case, I will read the first volume aloud, without needing to use ink to write. The correctness of the edible script will be determined by Bian Xiao."
This immediately left the nearby disciples astonished, their mouths agape. Reading aloud? Was he out of his mind? Upon hearing this, Bian Xiao inwardly cursed, thinking how arrogant he was. If he didn't understand, what would he do?
Without waiting any longer, Zhang Yan began to read from the sharp weapon diagram, which contained cultivation techniques related to high-level cultivation methods, discussing how to manage the timing of his qi meridian refining.
Zhang Yan continued to speak at length, then proceeded to delve into the flawed mouth section of the sharp weapon diagram. Zhao Ying, observing Bian Xiao's trembling hands, expressed her astonishment.
Bian Xiao felt a bit perplexed. If this truly was a high-level cultivation method, then Zhang Yan would indeed qualify as an extraordinary talent. Zhang Yan continued, "The flawed mouth of the sharp weapon diagram is as follows: opening divine aperture, enemy cleansing spirit pill." The disciples nearby eagerly urged one another, "Whether it's real or fake, hurry and find some paper to write it down, it could be a genuine secret method of the school." Zhang Yan recited the edible script as if it were ingrained in him, entering the divine spirit of time, tempering both body and mind to eliminate wasteful merging. Zhao Ying began to feel something unusual within her body. As the flawed mouth of Zhang Yan circulated inner energy, she sensed a warm current surging inside, akin to stepping into a realm of mystical wonders. It truly was miraculous. At that moment, the disciples around them all began to cultivate in unison. Bian Xiao noticed this and felt a tightness in his expression, akin to a startled deer, fearing that everyone would be swept away by the whirlpool that Zhang Yan had created. He shouted out, "That's enough, stop reciting, this book is fine." He was exasperated and surmised that Zhang Yan must have read this text before, which was why he could recite it so fluently. The next text was a new edible script. He was curious to see what Zhang Yan would do next. At that moment, a new disciple hurriedly ran over and said, "Down here, you're late, oh my." Bian Xiao was afraid of being embarrassed again, so he instructed Zhang Yan carefully to avoid revealing the secret method. "I want you to translate this edible script," he said, and of course, Zhang Yan was not easily intimidated. Zhang Yan looked around for a while and then thought. The extensive canon text seemed simple at first glance. Although there were only 60 bamboo-style characters, they contained 64 types of rules of law, which made understanding them quite laborious. Moreover, if even one type was missing, it would lead to failure. Seeing Zhang Yan suddenly quiet, Bian Xiao mocked him, "Don't tell me that with 60 bamboo-style characters, Zhang Junior disciple still can't read them." Zhang Yan snorted and then thought that the piece of jade could enhance his thinking. After all, one day outside was worth 10 days inside the jade. Zhang Yan discreetly picked up the piece of jade and began to calculate. By borrowing the power of the jade, he had more time to think and could properly understand the edible script. Bian Xiao, seeing Zhang Yan starting to sit at the table, felt anxious. Did Zhang Yan not even need a bamboo cover? Could it be that he had a secret? After scribbling for a while, Zhang Yan slowly put down his brush and spoke, "I have completed the understanding of the 64 types of secret method in the extensive canon texts. Manager Bian can personally verify it, or Your Excellency can read it for yourself." The disciples did not wait for Bian Xiao to respond and rushed in, clamoring to read. However, Bian Xiao abruptly snatched the disordered pile of papers back and shouted, "Let me see." His eyes darted back and forth over the sheets, appearing to read with great concentration. After a while, suddenly, the precious ceramic vase in Bian Xiao's hand was knocked to the ground, shattering into pieces. Bian Xiao was taken aback, his skin prickling with shock. How could this be? A disciple from a lower tier could comprehend the extensive canon texts, and it was much clearer than the translations he had read before. even the difficult parts were explained clearly.
But if he yielded to him, where would that leave his own dignity? Zhang Yan spoke up, asking Bian Xiao what he thought.
Naturally, Bian Xiao did not want to acknowledge it and spoke in circles. I didn't expect you to have such skill, but there is still one final book you can comprehend.
Mr. Bian is truly impressed.
Zhang Yan gently opened the last volume, the Wei book, read for a while, then closed it again, directly exposing him. This true essence refining manual is merely a compilation of borrowed techniques from various sources.
Don't tell me it's just something you wrote for fun in your spare time?
Laughter erupted among the disciples, and Bian Xiao was left humiliated by those words.
You. At that moment, Zhao Yuan suddenly burst through the door and exclaimed loudly, Zhang Yan's senior disciple. Zhao Ying was taken aback and exclaimed, Brother Jia, you're awake.
Zhao Yuan approached Zhao Ying to reassure him, I'm fine, don't worry, brother. Zhang Yan stepped closer to Zhao Yuan and reminded him once again, Brother Zhao, remember the unstable emotions in the unfamiliar cultivation method. Zhao Yuan replied with concern, don't call me senior disciple, I should be calling you senior disciple instead. I feel truly ashamed to trouble you today.
Zhang Yan responded, Brother Zhao, you're overthinking it.
I wonder how the eternal flow path method is progressing. Zhao Yuan honestly replied, the eternal flow path method that you've been studying is indeed a top-notch cultivation method. Although my approach to cultivation may not be correct, after waking up, my cultivation has advanced as if through rebirth and transformation.
Zhang Yan then joyfully congratulated him.
The disciples who overheard their conversation began to praise, Zhang Yan is truly impressive, who would have thought that the Pavilion of Profound Benevolence has such a talent? The Moral Training Pavilion and the Pavilion of Profound Benevolence share the same lineage, so in the future, we can seek Brother Zhang for insights on the edible script.
At this moment, Zhang Yan turned to ask, Bian, am I clean?
Bian Xiao hurriedly tried to smooth things over, saying, today was just a misunderstanding, those who cultivate the way do not sweat the small stuff.
Our acquaintance can be seen as a fateful connection.
After that, fearing that Zhang Yan would pursue the matter further, he quickly took out a vial of items. This is the Wisdom Harmony Pill, which can strengthen the essence and unblock the meridian system. Consider it a token of our meeting. Zhang Yan thought to himself, the Wisdom Harmony Pill is a priceless treasure.
If I accept this, I can go with the flow and benefit from it.
With that thought, he sighed. Zhang Yan decided to let everything go as if nothing had happened. Dian's actions were reasonable and justified. Since everyone belonged to the same faction, it was natural to use fire as the source. Bian Xiao naturally chimed in, yes, using fire as the source. However, deep down, he felt a bit suspicious. This kid was indeed quite straightforward. After that, Zhang Yan was surrounded by the disciples who sought his help, saying, Brother Zhang, does the senior disciple have a spiritual partner on the path?
I want one.
I have this book, the Wei book, please take a look, senior disciple. With so many people around, Zhang Yan quickly found an excuse to retreat, saying, the sky is getting dark, I must take my leave. Bian Xiao watched the figure of the boy leave, feeling a sense of confusion that wouldn't go away. He had heard that Zhang Yan was merely a registered disciple. How could he possibly understand something as profound as this? Could it be that this person was exceptionally gifted, perhaps a descendant of some cultivating the Wei family, or even a spy from the demonic sect? Bian Xiao thought seriously about it. This was indeed a bit strange. He decided that he would have to visit the Pavilion of Profound Benevolence the next day to investigate Zhang Yan's identity. What a truly idle person with nothing better to do. 3 days later, early in the morning, at Zhang Yan's cave abode, he was unaware of what he had just accomplished, but he let out a sigh of relief. Looking at his slender hands, he recalled what he had often heard others say. A cultivator on the Tao path, after reaching the mystical bamboo realm, would have arms that could generate 1,000 pounds of strength, eyes that could see through the dense mists of enchantment, and ears that could distinguish the sounds of insects and birds. Zhang Yan gently closed his eyes. It seemed that the saying was indeed true. His former self was merely a beginner disciple of the Heavenly Mountain Gate, and the cultivation method he had acquired was nothing more than the most superficial and rudimentary level. He judged that without a superior cultivation method to guide him, the path of immortality would end here. Zhang Yan suddenly recalled that a few days ago, when he was translating the bamboo-style eternal flow path method for Zhao Yuan, the rigid atmosphere within his body had surged unexpectedly, which led him to cultivate in this manner. Additionally, the Wisdom Harmony pill and pure jade sand helped him stabilize his vital energy and blood, so it wasn't too exhausting. After 3 years of hard cultivation, he had finally advanced to the refining the origin, manifesting the intent mystical bamboo realm, and he was just one step away from the final stage of entering the ultimate truth. Zhou Wangyan felt a bit satisfied. He had finally stepped onto the righteous path of immortality. If he continued to endure in the cave, waiting for the heavenly opportunity to bestow upon him, where would today's opportunity come from? Cultivating the way was like a ladder to the heavens. The higher one climbed, the more difficult it became, and along the way, one would encounter many petty individuals who would cause harm. Zhang Yan silently reminded himself that the path of cultivation was long and arduous, and the mystical bamboo realm was merely the first step on the grand Tao. He must not become complacent and careless. Zhang Yan had just settled into a meditative posture, gazing into the distance. The path of cultivating the way resembled a troop marching along a wooden bridge, with no way back, only forward. Despite the hardships and dangers, one must regard it as a smooth road. After a while, as Zhang Yan was deeply focused on cultivating the way, a sudden knock on the door interrupted him. Zhang Yan felt extremely puzzled. Since he had entered seclusion for his training, very few people had come to visit him. Who could it be this time? He wondered aloud. Which senior brother is it outside? Immediately, a voice came through. Young master, it's Zhang Shi. Zhang Yan was slightly surprised. Oh, it's Uncle Shi. This person is honest and kind. He is a servant in our family mansion, and in the memories of our ancestors, he has always been regarded as an elder in the household. After thinking this, he quickly stood up to open the door. Uncle Shi, it's been a while since we last met. What brings you up the mountain at this time? Zhang Shi replied sincerely. 3 months ago, when I met the young master, the weather was gradually turning cold. The young master appeared frail. An old servant felt an uneasy worry in his heart, prompting him to venture up the mountain to check on him. Zhang Yan pushed Zhang Shi into the house and said, Uncle Shi, you arrived just in time. Tell me some interesting stories from below the mountain. It would be a perfect way to relieve the pent-up frustrations of the past few months. Zhang Shi sighed and replied, Young master, before his death, the old master had high hopes for you, wishing only for you to excel in your studies. How could you waste precious time here in such a manner? Disappointment filled Zhang Shi's voice as he continued, In the family, you are the only one with potential. Why must you endure this meager existence? Zhang Yan gazed out the window at the sky and began to recite poetry. Golden lightning, bone firm, overcoming trials and struggles, Duke of mercy, golden age of supreme mastery, golden dream only seeking immortal, beyond worry and sorrow, how can my heart traverse the great path? Can it indulge in the greed for worldly riches? Zhang Yan had an extremely strict determination. Having experienced a catastrophic apocalypse in his previous life, he had come to understand the various natural disasters and plagues that could arise. As a mere mortal, one had no strength to resist. In this life, having been reborn as a human, he was determined to attain the great path of immortality. Upon hearing this, Zhang Shi's expression grew more and more dejected. Young master, your aptitude is not high. Pursuing immortality seems hopeless. Why must you suffer like this? Deep down, he felt even more despair. The young master had read numerous texts on immortality, his mind had become tainted, and he was now believing in those absurd and fantastical tales. As soon as Zhang Yan heard what Zhang Shi said, he felt somewhat irritated and retorted, Not high aptitude? Where did you hear that? At that moment, a man interjected between the two. Heard it from me, he said. Zhang Yan's face immediately turned cold. It was Zhu Zishang. Zhu Zishang, along with his subordinates, had come to stand at the entrance of Zhang Yan's house, laughing loudly. The wealthy man had grown significantly during his years in this mountain. Zhu Zishang began to mock Zhang Yan with words, stating that the path to enlightenment was arduous and that with an ordinary talent, he might as well return home and follow the example of his parents. Living a peaceful life as a common person for the rest of his days, wasn't that a form of freedom and joy?
Zhang Yan couldn't help but snicker, and without an ounce of familial affection, he shot back at him. Whose parents? Whose family?
Zhang Yan started to reminisce about the circumstances of his past, realizing that the experiences of his previous life were indeed strange. 3 years ago, his former self had taken Juyu Suo, the young lady from the Ding Yang Zhou family, as his concubine. After conducting the marriage rites with this woman, on the wedding night, she radiated a divine light and proclaimed herself a reincarnated goddess, saying she was soon to ascend to the heavenly realm, asking him to take care of her mortal parents, and that 100 years later, she would follow his former self back to the heavenly realm to enjoy pleasures together. Zhang Yan's former self believed these words wholeheartedly, and even though his relatives were arrogant and fierce, he harbored no resentment and devoted himself to caring for the Zhou family. One day, a sage arrived at the illusory void, stating that Zhu Suo was merely an ordinary cultivator on the Dao path. He was originally a disciple of the saint of the spiritual cliff from the Jade Owl sect. Because Zhu Suo was devoted to cultivating the great Dao, he could not take care of his parents by his side. Concerned that his moral cultivation was not sufficiently complete, the sage sought out the former self of Zhang Yan and performed a soul shield technique on him. This allowed the young master to break free from caring for his parents, compensating for the heavenly Dao. Fortunately, the former self of Zhang Yan received guidance to go to the pavilion of profound benevolence of the Nether Spear sect to seek the Dao. As a result, he avoided this calamity and breathed a sigh of relief. Zhu Suo's junior brother, Zhu Zishang, came here today to force him to return. It seemed that after his departure, the Zhou family could not find a new young master to take his place. After reflecting on everything, Zhang Yan loudly refused. Right now, I am solely focused on seeking the Dao. How could I become a pawn for your Zhou family? Upon hearing this, Zhu Zishan was left speechless, stammering in response. His heart began to tremble. In his anger, Zhang Yan had ascended to the mystical bamboo realm, and his cultivation was even more stable than his own. Zhu Zishang wondered if he had received guidance from some senior master. As a disciple of the Jade Owl sect, if he were to forcibly take him away, the Nether Spear sect would undoubtedly not let it go easily. Given the situation, it would be difficult to move him now, and just the thought of it made him so angry that he felt like his head was going to explode. In the end, Zhu Zishang had no choice but to turn and leave. If it was going to be like this, then he should take care of himself. Zhang Yan, for his part, couldn't help but smile in satisfaction. After today, the Zhou family would likely increase their pressure. Fortunately, his own understanding of the Great Tao had reached a certain level. If Zhu Zishang had arrived a few days earlier, it would have truly been hard for him to cope. At the same time, down the mountain, 3 people were chatting enthusiastically. Among them was Bianxiao the steward. Senior disciple, is Zhang Yan's background not bad? Sighed Zhongwen, a disciple of the Pavilion of Profound Benevolence, who replied, I have investigated 3 times already and confirmed that Zhang Yan is from Eastern Peaceful Stability, a regular registered disciple, who ascended the mountain at the age of 17 as a guardian. Dian Xiao responded, Then I apologize for troubling you, senior disciple, it seems that I was overthinking things before. At this moment, Lin Tong beside him couldn't help but snort arrogantly, just a small fry, who knows where he learned that crude cultivation method, the bamboo style. This guy has gained quite a reputation recently among the lower ranks of the sect. I need to overshadow his brilliance a bit. Master Zhongwen gently stepped forward to remind him, then let's go scout ahead. I've heard that Zhang Yan is in the mystical bamboo realm, so senior disciple Lin should remain vigilant. Lin Tong dismissed the previous words with a laugh. I'd been on the mountain for 9 years, and with my elder brother guiding me, I only reached the Silver Source Reveals meaning mystical bamboo realm 2 years ago. I see Zhang Yan's strength, it's mostly just rumors. With that, Master Zhongwen began to lead Tang Lin Tong to Zhang Yan's residence. According to the sect's records, they were heading directly to Zhang Yan's place. Lin Tong responded excitedly, all right. Both of them were walking normally when they suddenly encountered Zhu Zishang, who was also coming down. Master Zhongwen silently sensed the person in front of him. He felt a slight shiver of fear from them. This individual's aura indicated that they had likely reached the opening meridian stage, so it was best not to provoke them. However, he didn't have time to warn Lin Tong, so Lin Tong directly approached and spoke rudely, Who are you?
A loyal dog shouldn't block the way. Get out of the way for Lin the Great.
Master Zhongwen urgently tried to stop him but was too late.
Lin's senior disciple, wait a moment.
You won't be mistaken, Zhu Zishang slapped Lin Tong hard enough to distort his mouth. He rolled down the stairs a few times, causing Sir Zhongwen to cry out tragically, Brother Lin, I told you to keep your mouth shut, but you didn't listen. Sir Zhongwen hurriedly pleaded, please, have mercy in this matter. Zhu Zishang did not respond, only snorted coldly as he stepped past Sir Zhongwen. Sir Zhongwen rushed to help the fool up, saying, Brother Lin, get up quickly. Once the two had left, Lin Tong cautiously spoke up, the cultivation level is too high.
Senior disciple, who is this person? I've never seen him on the mountain before.
Sir Zhuwen replied softly, from the looks of this person, it appears to be Zhu Shangyang.
Lin Tong, holding one side of his face, shouted, what an annoyance.
Sir Zhongwen turned to remind him, Lin, that person is ruthless.
Be careful, he could leave you with internal injuries. You might as well rest for now, and let me handle the matter with Zhang Yuan.
Lin Tong responded, then I must trouble you, junior disciple, I hope he returns soon. After Lin Tong left, Mr. Zhongwen began to think seriously and looked in a certain direction. Perhaps Zhu Zishang had just come from Zhang Yan's place.
Zhu Zishang was a disciple nurtured by the Jade sect, how could he be related to Zhang Yan?
Mr. Zhongwen frowned, thinking that the matter was definitely not simple. Soon after, Mr. Zhongwen arrived at Zhang Yan's residence.
He knocked on the door and called out loudly, is Mr. Zhang home? After a few creaks, Zhang Yan gently pushed the door open, a bit wary, and asked, are you Mr. Zhongwen? Mr. Zhongwen calmly replied, I am Mr. Zhongwen.
The senior disciple is indeed as rumored, with a radiant demeanor and handsome like a hot boy. Zhang Yan gradually fell silent to assess the situation. Mr. Zhongwen had heard that this person had extensive connections and shared the same cultivation level in the mystical bamboo realm as him. Usually, Zhang Yan was responsible for recording the list of disciples in the sect, but this time he came to greet him. Could it be that he had heard about the conflict between me and Bian Xiao and had come to investigate my faults? At the same time, Lord Zhongwen carefully assessed the young man. Although Zhang Yan appeared ordinary, his looks and physique were exceptionally handsome, and his piercing, clear gaze seemed to carry an air of pressure. It was clear that his cultivation was undoubtedly not weaker than his own, and might even be several levels stronger. Zhang Yan quickly regained his composure and replied, Senior disciple is too kind. I, Zhang Yan, have long admired the esteemed reputation of senior disciple.
Please, come inside and take a seat.
The cave abode may be a bit chilly, I hope you won't find it displeasing.
Lord Zhongwen responded, it's nothing.
Zhang Yan invited Lord Zhongwen into his home to sit and share tea, while the expression on the latter's face was somewhat peculiar. He discreetly slipped one hand into his pocket and thought to himself that Zhang Yan's extraordinary demeanor must indicate that he truly possessed remarkable abilities. Initially, he had intended to challenge him with an edible script, but now it seemed wiser to turn an enemy into a friend and present him with a gift of humanity. Seeing Lord Zhongwen suddenly take out the Wei book, Zhang Yan spoke up, I've heard that senior disciple excels in understanding edible scripts. Lord Zhongwen replied, recently, I found a book titled Seeking Miraculous Methods. I would like to gift it to senior disciple for us to read together, and I hope to receive some guidance in return. Zhang Yan took the Wei book and let out a sigh of relief. It seemed that this time, Mr. Zhongwen came solely to build a friendship with him. Mr. Zhongwen continued, then I thank you, senior disciple. By the way, when I arrived here, I encountered someone familiar, it seems to be the third young master of the Zhou family.
Do you know him, senior disciple?
Zhang Yan calmly replied, it's not just an acquaintance, that elder sister's third young master is actually my wife. Upon hearing this, Mr. Zhongwen felt as if he had been struck by lightning, unable to believe it. Zhang Yan and Zhu Zishang were actually related as brother-in-law to Ding Yang of the Zhou family in the Eastern Flower Continent, a position of great prestige. In the past 100 years, there have been no fewer than a dozen cultivators at the essence core level who could marry a daughter of the Zhou family.
Zhang Yan's background was not simple, it was essential to cultivate this relationship. After thinking this, Mr. Zhongwen asked again, "Do you know about the mystic law gathering, senior disciple?"
Zhang Yan replied, "Of course, I know, the mystic law gathering occurs once every 3 years."
He sighed again and added, "I actually wanted to go and take a look, but usually, I only focus on my cultivation and don't associate with fellow practitioners, so I have never been able to get in."
As soon as Zhang Yan finished speaking, he fell silent, feeling anxious as he stared intently at the book and pondered his home region, known as the Eastern Flower Continent. The Eastern Flower Continent is home to a total of 16 sects, with countless small sects scattered beneath them. Every 3 years, a mystic law gathering is organized among the various sects, and during this event, the most outstanding cultivators from each major sect, whether they are new practitioners or registered disciples, come together to exchange insights on the cultivation of the way. The reason this cultivation assembly is called mystic law is linked to the legend of the edible script from the time of creation. After enduring the erosion of sun and wind, the mountains and rivers have formed vast and magnificent patterns that conceal the profound mysteries of heaven and earth within them. After undergoing calculations and revisions by ancient moralists, these patterns gradually evolved into the unique script that cultivators on the Tao path now utilize. Ancient legends tell that a cultivator on the Tao path, solely relying on their understanding of the edible script, could comprehend the great Tao. The white sun ascension, even in oral tradition, is sufficient to demonstrate the power of the edible script in grasping the fundamental essence of the Tao. To understand the edible script is to have the opportunity to access the threshold of profound wisdom. The mystic law gathering, which employs edible script for communication and competition, is also regarded as a grand assembly for cultivators to discuss doctrines, engage in debates, and showcase their skills. Suddenly, Master Zhongwen made a suggestion. "The mystic law gathering is about to commence. With your level and understanding of edible script, senior disciple, how can you not showcase your talents at the cultivation assembly? Come along with me for a journey." Upon hearing this, Zhang Yan pondered for a moment. The mystic law gathering is a valuable opportunity for peers to interact, learn, and enhance their sect's prestige. It is also a rare occasion to demonstrate one's abilities. Naturally, Zhang Yan could not decline the invitation from senior disciple. Having received an invitation, a junior disciple cannot refuse. Mr. Zhongwen took out a token and explained, "All right, this token is the insignia of the cultivation assembly. Holding it allows you to enter the mountain gate." Mr. Zhongwen added, "This is the supreme origin pill, used to regulate qi and meridians, and there are 12 pills in total. The cultivation assembly is bound to involve competition, so I hope senior disciple will accept this to stabilize your strength." Zhang Yan continued to accept it and bowed his head. "Thank you, senior disciple." Mr. Zhongwen also bowed his head in response. "There's no need for formalities, senior disciple. I still have sect affairs to attend to, so I will take my leave now." Very quickly, 5 days passed like a fleeting moment in the fields. Zhang Yan was still sitting in his house, lost in thought and practicing the edible script. Unexpectedly, seeking miraculous methods turned out to be one of the 10 precious mental techniques. It relates to the final step of entering the ultimate truth, with each word as precious as pearls. Zhang Yan slowly closed his eyes, trying to understand each word in the edible script that not everyone could comprehend. Zhang Yan thought to himself, every time he encountered a new edible script, Shattered Jade could help him perform the secret method, analyzing its strengths and weaknesses. His consciousness could also practice within the world of Shattered Jade, avoiding the mistakes of learning the secret method of burning out and possession. Zhang Yan then opened his eyes and said, "But using Shattered Jade really consumes mental energy. Fortunately, I had taken the Supreme Origin pill beforehand, so it's not too exhausting." After downing the Supreme Origin pill, Zhang Yan closed his eyes again, feeling his body gradually improving. His inner energy surged throughout his body, his foundational essence was full, and his aura was vibrant, even more so than if he had meditated for an entire night. Zhang Yan couldn't help but cheer with joy, surprised by the extraordinary effects of the elixir. Every disciple of the ancient mystical sect was at the mystical bamboo realm. It seemed that apart from their high-level teachings, they also had the support of miraculous pills. Unfortunately, he had too few elixirs in his possession. He would need to gather more in the future, and he absolutely could not miss any opportunities. At the same time, in the inner sect of the Pavilion of Profound Benevolence, Zhu Zishan was standing on a nearby tree, intently observing something within the inner sect.
It turns out that Zhu Zishan was busy contemplating.
Zhang Yan understood the edible script on Mount Kangwu, and now he was famous in the three views. There must be a master behind him providing guidance. Then he broke into a mysterious smile. As a disciple of the Jadal sect, I couldn't forcibly take Zhang Yan away, but there was still a way to leverage the sovereign ruler of the Pavilion of Profound Benevolence. Just then, a servant from the sovereign ruler's household came out to greet us.
The sovereign ruler invited the esteemed guests to come and visit. Zhu Zishan coldly ordered him to lead the way.
Standing in front of the sovereign ruler's house, Zhu Zishan seemed to be calculating something. As soon as we entered, a voice rang out, "You, as the one who wields the jade flute, are always surrounded by incense here, and they even worship their ancestors above."
The sovereign ruler continued to ask, "Why have you come to visit the Pavilion of Profound Benevolence?" Zhu Zishan respectfully replied, "I am Ding Yang Zhu Zishang, a registered disciple in the official ranks, and Zhang Yan is my elder brother."
He began to fabricate a story, saying that he was upset about matters at home and had come to the mountain. This time, he wanted to take his brother down from the mountain. The sovereign ruler replied calmly, "The disciple in the cultivating the way relies on the original Tao heart. The elder Taoist has never forced anyone. As the leader of the Jadal sect, you should not impose on his Tao heart." Zhu Zishang secretly smiled, having anticipated this situation long ago. He quickly reached into his robe and said, "The matter is as follows." Zhu Zishang took out a book titled The Way Book and presented it before the sovereign ruler. "Please deliver this The Way Book to my elder brother. I'm sure the Taoist will not refuse, right?" The sovereign ruler glanced at the book with edible script for a moment, then replied without hesitation, "In that case, let the poor Taoist deliver it." Zhu Zishang immediately broke into a sly smile. "Thank you, fellow cultivator." After that, the old sovereign ruler loudly announced the departure of his guest, waving the brush in his hand as he spoke. Zhu Zishan was escorted outside, unable to contain his laughter at the perfection of his plan. At this moment, the sovereign ruler continued to glance at the Way book that had just been presented, pondering a bit. He looked at the title and thought to himself, "The Profound Primordial Inner Reflection Mystical Records is indeed an ancient classic, originally belonging to Crane Taoist from the Southern Flower Sect, and is considered a superior cultivation method for opening the immortal meridian. However, the content of this book, the secret method, is exceedingly complex and harbors significant consequences. Without the guidance of a master, it is easy to harm one's internal channels, self-destruct one's foundational path, and lose the qualification to cultivate the way." The sovereign ruler began to feel a bit curious and wondered what grievances Zhu Zishang and Zhang Yan had that led to the obstruction of another's path to cultivation. At the same time, at Zhang Yan's residence, a group of people had gathered from who knows where, indulging in revelry and merriment. At this moment, Lin Yuan, a disciple newly admitted to the lower house, shouted loudly, "Zhang Yan, are you aware of your crime?" Zhang Yan stepped outside, and after hearing his question, he stood there in a daze for a long time, unsure of what crime Mr. Zhang had committed. Lin Yuan continued to scold him fiercely, "You, along with the disciples of Guang Yuan sect, have engaged in internal strife, competing to prove superiority, a crime deserving of death." Zhang Yan furrowed his brow in irritation but maintained his composure as he replied, "Lin's senior disciple, Mo Yuan's revelation has caused our three Nether Spear sect disciples to be unable to reach their peak for 3 days. Although I am merely an unknown disciple, I understand that the two characters' humiliation are meant to prevent Guang Yuan sect from recklessly tarnishing the reputation of Nether Spear sect." Lin Yuan certainly did not want to listen to him reason. He directly shouted for him to shut up. "All the senior disciples already have plans. How can a junior like you be allowed to make a fuss and capture Zhang Yan for me?" At this moment, Master Zhang Wan, who was standing next to Zhang Yan, couldn't help but be surprised. As the two were arguing, they noticed that the others were cursing and bickering. Hu Shengyu suddenly grasped Master Zhang Wan's hand tightly and whispered, "If you don't want to share the blame with Zhang Yan, then don't move." Zhang Wan was taken aback, his body seemed unable to move. At this time, the lower house disciples also began to approach Zhang Yan, preparing to encircle him. In this critical moment, someone suddenly rang a loud bell, the noise causing all three of them to feel a headache. At that moment, a significant figure appeared above them and asked, "Where is Zhang Yan?" The person continued, the senior master has issued an order. The pavilion of profound benevolence summons disciple Zhang Yan to enter for a ceremony. Both Zhang Yan and Lin Yuan's group have come out together, but why at this moment? The man continued to speak loudly, the senior master's token is here, where is Zhang Yan? Hurry up and come forward. It turned out that Zhang Yan was holding the large brush of the senior master. Lin Yuan trembled as soon as he finished looking. This was the senior master Shi Jing's personal death decree. After that, Lin Yuan discreetly ordered the disciples not to act rashly, lest they bring disaster upon themselves. Thus, they had no choice but to withdraw and not provoke a significant figure. Zhang Yan then stood up and replied, is Mr. Zhang here? The other person asked again, are you Zhang Yan? After the boy nodded, the other person jumped down the steps and said, Zhang Yan, come with me to enter the sect. As he gradually left with the other person, the group of disciples asked Lin Yuan in disappointment, are we just letting him go like that? The disciples began to chatter restlessly. What else could they do? They absolutely could not defy the senior master's orders. Knowing this, they regretted not just killing him directly. Given the unclear situation, they decided to wait and see how the master would arrange things. Suddenly, Nai Zhongwen snorted coldly, turned around, and left, clutching his marked arm as he said, Mr. Nai will remember the kindness of several senior brothers today. At this moment, in the Hall of the Three Purities, Zhang Yan was led here by that man. The man told him to stop in front of the gate and said, Senior disciple, please wait here, I will go in to report. A multitude of thoughts began to arise in Zhang Yan's mind. This time, having pushed back a well-known sect like the Guangyuan sect, it was only reasonable for the upper echelons to want to take him in as a disciple. However, the benefits would surely come with drawbacks, and saying that, the path ahead might not necessarily be smooth sailing. After he finished his thoughts, the man came out and said, Senior disciple, the three senior masters invite you in. Without any delay, Zhang Yan entered, kneeling respectfully to greet them. The registered disciple Zhang Yan met the three senior masters. One was Xiaoshou Xian, the head of the moral training pavilion, in the middle was Shi Jing, the head of the pavilion of profound benevolence, and on the right was Qin Zhong, the head of Tian. Shi Jing asked, Zhang Yan, you have been on the mountain for more than 3 years. Where did you learn the edible script you have been practicing? Zhang Yan respectfully replied, half is innate talent, and the other half is effort. Upon hearing this, Xiaoshou Xian couldn't help but sneer, good, half is innate talent and the other half is effort. But talent comes first, and if you don't succeed, then what use is innate talent? Shi Jing stroked his beard and chuckled lightly, you actually know quite a lot. Suddenly, he pulled out the Book the Way book from his pocket and said, take this. Shi Jing explained, this Tao book is a superior secret method for opening the meridians, but the approach involves a lot of energy. If you're not careful, it could ruin your foundation. He continued, however, it is indeed a classic of the first-rate Immortal sect. The ancient orthodox teachings are not to be discarded lightly. Now, whether you choose to cultivate it or not is up to you to decide. He said this because he did not want to directly reveal Zhu Zishan's name. Qin Zhong suddenly frowned and ordered, Zhang Yan, you may leave. Zhang Yan immediately bowed his head and said, thank you, three masters, for your generosity. He took his leave promptly and quickly turned to leave, creating a private space for the three of them. Qin Zhong spoke seriously, I see that Zhang Yan has a naturally noble temperament, but his aptitude is merely average. I fear that his achievements will be limited, especially since he has offended a group of entry-level disciples. He is likely to lose more than he gains. Shi Jing shook his head and comforted, it's all right, junior disciple. I will take that mouthful of the tranquil summit to Zhang Yan, so he can use it as a shield to see how it works. Upon hearing this, Qin Zhong stroked his beard and nodded in approval, thinking it was a very good idea. At that moment, Zhang Yan had also exited the magistrate's residence, his mind swirling with thoughts. As he reached the gate, the guide from before excitedly called out, congratulations, senior disciple. Just before senior master entered seclusion, he transmitted a decree, and you have now become the 13th entry disciple of the Pavilion of Profound Benevolence. Zhang Yan could not help but be surprised, entry disciple? To go through so much effort for this status, and now that I have finally accomplished it, it feels hardly different. He slipped a small pill into the guide's hand and said, "Thank you, junior disciple. Please accept this medicinal pill." The junior disciple hurriedly tucked it into his sleeve, glancing around nervously as if afraid someone might see. Then he leaned in and whispered a few things into Zhang Yan's ear, mentioning that some senior masters had also taken notice of various items and wanted to pass them on to him. "I have already sent someone to deliver them to your cave abode, senior disciple, so don't worry."
Zhang Yan chuckled to himself. These miscellaneous objects were not easy to move.
If it weren't for this medicinal pill, he feared he would have to take matters into his own hands. Therefore, Zhang Yan decided to be a bit courteous and said, "I'll trouble you, junior disciple." The junior disciple happily replied, "It's no trouble at all, senior disciple.
Farewell." After that, Zhang Yan quickly returned to his residence.
As soon as he opened the door, he was surprised to see a bronze cauldron appearing in the middle of the room. Zhang Yan slowly approached it, pondering, "Is this the object that the disciple of the Tao spoke of?" He mumbled to himself, "Guardian Jade Cauldron, my senior master gave me this cauldron, not to use this to deceive my future prospects.
Is it a reminder for me to choose to become a laborer? Is this a way to push me to withdraw, to not compete with the other entry-level disciples for cultivating resources?" Thinking of this, Zhang Yan clenched his fists in anger. "If I willingly become a laborer, then what is left of cultivating immortality? What remains of the way of cultivation? How can I allow others to decide my path in cultivating?" Zhang Yan's gaze grew extremely resolute and cold. He gently touched the edge of the cauldron and thought to himself that the Guardian Jade Cauldron, after all, could also be considered a magical artifact, one that bore the mark of the essence of the spirit, and therefore should not be wasted so easily. After that, Zhang Yan hurriedly went to gather firewood to stuff under the cauldron, not forgetting to add water, and then stripped off his clothes and jumped into the cauldron, disregarding the heat. Every disciple of the mystic sect, even those in the foundational realm, had a guardian master. Yet here he was, relying solely on himself, which was truly a last resort. Zhang Yan gritted his teeth, enduring the heat from the Guardian Jade Cauldron, his sweat turning from clear to black, as the water quickly transformed into a deep, dark hue. He thought to himself that he had swallowed no less than 26 core essence pills. The primordial energy within his body had been refined over half, but no matter how hard he tried, there remained a trace of primordial energy in the central origin channel that had never been refined and could not be forced out. Suddenly, Zhang Yan found himself lost in deep contemplation, his expression gradually becoming serious. At that moment, what occupied his mind was the essence of life and death, a natural test. Zhang Yan had cultivated his vital energy to such an extent that it had already become a powerful current, flowing like a river. However, the pressure from his own thoughts was too great, causing his natural path to suffer. His true intent became obscured, making his vital energy feel uncomfortable. This, in turn, caused his internal vital energy to stagnate, unable to advance. In this situation, the mystical bamboo realm became even more similar. Zhang Yan decided to ignore that thread of vital energy and instead keep the three treasures Danxiao tranquil, no longer worrying. Time passed to the point where the firewood had ceased to burn. Suddenly, Zhang Yan opened his eyes wide, as if he had just comprehended something. He exclaimed excitedly, "I have finally surpassed the path beyond the first gate and entered the realm of entering the ultimate truth." Zhang Yan quickly grabbed a towel and then pondered. As long as he continued to spend some time to enhance his true essence and strive to reach a higher realm, he would move towards the open meridian pill. At that moment, it seemed that the peak above was worried he was progressing too slowly, so it had come down to lend a hand. Zhang Yan jumped out of the Guardian Jade Cauldron, wrapped the towel around himself, and laughed heartily, exclaiming joyfully. Zhang Yan walked thoughtfully, pondering deeply. While others took the peak to advise Mo Chang, I instead utilized a solid block of true essence. When one's heart is clouded with delusions, the calculation of fate becomes futile, and one cannot expect to avoid existence with just a single attempt. That afternoon, the sun was nearly at its zenith. Suddenly, two figures appeared in the sky, chasing each other. One was a snake demon desperately fleeing from something, while the other was a disciple of the Nether Spear sect, Ning Song Xian,
who was relentlessly pursuing from behind, "Do you still dare to ride the clouds in front of me?" The snake demon suddenly released a cloud of black mist to obscure Ning Songxian's path, yet he remained confidently unfazed, using a bit of trickery to mock it. Ning Songxian's eyes shone brightly as he shot forth two beams of light. The rays pierced through the black mist, startling the snake demon. Ning Songxian quickly drew his sword, a confident smile on his face. He thrust it powerfully into the back of the snake demon, causing it to scream loudly. Not satisfied with just that, Ning Songxian then dragged the blade along the length of the snake demon's spine. However, Ning Songxian was stunned when he realized that the snake demon had been so desperate to escape that it had resorted to harming itself. The snake demon hovered in the air for a long while before it began to slither down to the ground. It flicked its tongue a few times while searching for a way to escape from the person nearby. Just as Ning Songxian jumped down to the ground, he surveyed his surroundings and concluded that the python had shrunk its body and burrowed deep into the mountain. Disappointed, Ning Songxian thought to himself that it was impossible to penetrate the mountain. Suddenly, he noticed a figure sitting atop a high cliff in the distance, and the figure spoke up. "To think that there would be a practitioner here, could this aura belong to a disciple of the lower house?" As it turned out, the person was none other than Zhang Yan, the one who was usually minding his own business. Ning Songxian approached him directly and asked, "Which sect do you belong to? What are you doing here alone?" Zhang Yan slowly opened his eyes, regarded the other man, and politely introduced himself. "I am Zhang Yan, a disciple of the lower house of the Nether Spear sect. May I inquire as to how to address you, senior disciple?" Ning Songxian coldly replied, "I am the disciple of the upper senate, Ning Songxian, pursuing a snake monster that has come this far. This snake monster has killed several of the upper senate's true disciples. It is truly a heinous crime." "Have you seen its movements?" Zhang Yan shook his head and replied, "Not at all." Ning Songxian immediately turned away, not forgetting to remind him, "Then you should be a bit more careful." In an instant, Ning Songxian soared away before Zhang Yan's admiring gaze. "When will I be able to reach such a realm?" He then sighed in frustration, "But he has his own path, and I have mine. There's nothing to envy. As long as my resolve is steadfast, one day, I too can soar the heavens and shake the earth." After that, Zhang Yan began to climb the stairs back home. Just as he stood in front of his house, Zhang Yan suddenly paused. Zhang Yan, feeling alert, thought to himself, "No, there's an unusual aura nearby." He approached the guardian jade cauldron and wondered, could the snake monster that Ning Songxian mentioned have come here? Zhang Yan nervously swallowed a gulp of saliva. "The snake monster can kill a senior disciple. Right now, I am no match for it." After thinking this, he reluctantly decided to take the risk and open the lid of the cauldron. As soon as Zhang Yan peeked inside, he saw the snake monster staring back at him, even hissing menacingly. Upon seeing the snake monster within the cauldron, Zhang Yan naturally didn't think twice and hurriedly replaced the lid, fearing it might escape and bite him. The snake monster was about to crawl out when it suddenly bumped its head against the lid. At that moment, its head was filled with stars and a delicate moon. Despite the snake monster rampaging within the town, Zhang Yan remained extremely cautious. The snake monster's cultivation was unpredictable. Zhang Yan secretly broke out in a cold sweat. If it were to break through the lid, he would have no choice but to flee. An hour later, the snake monster seemed to have exhausted itself from the chaos and finally stopped, allowing Zhang Yan to breathe a sigh of relief. At last, everything became quiet. Suddenly, a voice emerged from within the town. "Senior martial brother, why have you imprisoned me here?" Zhang Yan calmly replied, "You sneaked into my cave abode and even killed 5 disciples of the Bright Blade sect, yet you ask why I have imprisoned you?" Upon hearing this, the snake monster clicked its tongue. This individual actually knew its background, which was inevitable. After a moment of thought, the snake monster began to devise a way to lure Zhang Yan. "I truly had no other choice but to seek refuge in this altar. I never intended to harm you. I implore you, senior martial brother, to release me." As Zhang Yan stuffed firewood into the bottom of the altar, he responded, "Senior disciple Ning has not gone far yet. If you were to leave my cave abode and were caught red-handed, how could I, Mr. Zhang, possibly prove my innocence?" The snake monster, hearing the rustling beneath its body, began to panic.
what are you doing?
Zhang Yan stood up, brushed the dust off his hands, and replied, "This peak is called the Peak of Tranquil Poking, used to cook delicious dishes that refine the essence. Just in time, I can use you to brew a pot of snake soup." Upon hearing this, the snake monster pleaded vigorously, "Please, what must I do for Senior Marshal Brother to spare my life?" Zhang Yan chuckled to himself, "How interesting." He then asked, "Let me ask you, why did you come to the Bright Blade sect?" The snake monster hesitated before answering, "I only came to hunt down those 5, there's no other reason." Zhang Yan scoffed in response, "Do you think I'm a 3-year-old child? How dare you use such a lie to deceive me?" Zhang Yan began to explain. "Our Bright Blade sect has been at war with the 3 Silver Lake demons for many years. Although both sides have suffered casualties, there has never been an act of invading each other's territory." He frowned again, exposing the lie. "And you, this time, are willing to chase down people all the way to the sacred grounds of my sect, just to kill a few disciples who are not even as good as you?" He slowly lit a fire and continued, "Surely they must have discovered some secret of yours, which is why you cannot let them live." At this moment, the snake monster began to feel a sense of confusion and fear. Why was it that a mere junior from the Bright Blade sect was proving to be so difficult to deal with? This young man could almost accurately guess the reasons behind everything, while the snake monster was heavily injured and unable to fight back. Well, never mind, it was better to keep its life. In the end, the snake monster had no choice but to plead, "Please don't burn me, I'll tell you everything." Only then did the snake monster begin to recount its story. "My name is La Ping. Previously, while I was engaged in battle with a disciple of the Bright Blade sect, I accidentally discovered a junior training ground that had gone unnoticed by anyone else. Unfortunately, this junior training ground was also discovered by some disciples of the Bright Blade sect. The two sides encountered each other right in the middle of the path." La Ping continued to narrate, "In order to monopolize the junior training ground, I didn't hesitate to infiltrate the territory of the Bright Blade sect, even going so far as to kill those disciples." La Ping added, "But we are so unfortunate to have run into Ning Songxian." As soon as Zhang Yan heard this, a thought crossed his mind. The junior training ground is a place where spirit tokens can be produced, and the golden pearls within these spirit tokens are essential materials for alchemy. The outer shell, once ground into powder, can also be used as materials to craft commonly used magical tools. Zhang Yan began to feel uneasy. Isn't it the case that for decades, disciples of the Bright Blade sect have been tirelessly competing over what is essentially just a junior training ground? Zhang Yan then probed further, "Is there anyone else who knows about this besides you?" La Ping replied emphatically, "No one else knows, no one else. Moreover, apart from me, no one could ever find that place." After pondering for a moment, Zhang Yan spoke up, "I can let you go, but you must swear an oath of blood and essence with me." La Ping, upon hearing this, naturally flew into a rage. "What kind of joke is that? Once the blood oath essence is released, I will be emotionally connected to you. If you blink, I won't survive either." La Ping, sulking, shouted, "I would rather die in here than that." Zhang Yan calmly replied, "Do you think that just because you know the location of the junior training ground, I wouldn't dare to kill you? The fire at the bottom of the peak is gradually getting fiercer." As Zhang Yan added more firewood, he continued, "Mr. Zhang thinks the junior training ground is too far away, while you are like a delicious pot of snake soup right in front of me. Eating it would make it mine." La Ping, feeling uncomfortable inside, yelled, "Don't burn it anymore, don't burn it anymore, I can't take it any longer, my skin is starting to sag." In the end, unable to endure it any longer, La Ping reluctantly agreed. I agree, that's enough." After saying that, La Ping quickly created a blood oath circle with his blood. At the same time, Zhang Yan also drew a drop of his own blood for the ritual. The bodies of Zhang Yan and La Ping seemed to merge as one. "I am you and you are me," Zhang Yan thought to himself. Clearly the blood oath was effective. He slowly opened the lid and said, "You can come out now." At that moment, La Ping hurriedly crawled out, gasping for air. If he had stayed in there any longer, he would surely have suffocated. As La Ping emerged, he looked around with curious eyes. He then climbed up onto the table in surprise,
profound primordial inner reflection mystical records, is someone trying to harm you? Zhang Yan asked in astonishment, what makes you say that?
La Ping replied, the spells in this book are all ancient and orthodox magic, capable of opening meridians and breaking barriers within just one lunar cycle.
There is only one drawback, they are prone to heavenly manipulation.
La Ping continued to explain, a month after opening the meridians, you must not hear the sound of thunder, otherwise, it will surely cause the true essence to fluctuate, harming the immortal meridian, and from then on, you will be forever disconnected from the disciple of the Tao.
La Ping drew a black line on his forehead and added, if it weren't for the fact that my life is intertwined with yours due to the essence of my blood, I wouldn't even bother telling you this.
Upon hearing this, Zhang Yan was naturally left speechless and in shock. Even though he had the shattered jade in his possession, practicing according to this book seemed to promise more harm than good.
Why would Shi Jing want to harm him? Zhang Yan, after listening to La Ping's explanation, started to feel confused and troubled.
If Shi Jing wanted to harm him, there was no need to go through the trouble of having him join the sect, not to mention giving him a treasure that hinted at becoming a forceful warrior.
So, where did this profound primordial inner reflection mystical records actually come from? Zhang Yan then asked La Ping, how do you know about this so well?
La Ping replied, our demon clan cultivates differently from your human way of cultivating the way. From the very beginning, there are countless major and minor tribulations. We have to learn from a young age how to avoid calamities. This way book was something I heard mentioned by the elders.
Curious, Zhang Yan pressed further, if this book contains hidden dangers, but is still worth trying to cultivate from, do you know how to evade those calamities?
La Ping replied nonchalantly, after you open the meridian, just dig a hole, wait until the thunder is about to strike, then immediately cover your face and mouth and hide inside.
After that, fill the hole back in.
If you stay hidden there for 7 days, you can avoid this thunder calamity.
Zhang Yan silently speculated.
This method, although a bit strange, was suggested by La Ping, who had a blood oath on him, so he probably wouldn't deceive him.
Suddenly, there was a rapid knocking at the door. Is Brother Zhang inside? I am Zhao Yuan here to pay a visit.
Upon hearing this, La Ping broke out in a cold sweat and looked at Zhang Yan, then swallowed hard. He hurriedly crawled into the town's top to hide.
Zhang Yan quickly went out to open the door and saw many people standing outside. He smiled lightly and asked, what brings Zhao senior disciple here today?
Zhao Yuan hurriedly introduced a companion, this is Princess Linya of Chao, the daughter of Song Grand Duke of the Wei dynasty. The princess has come here specifically to pay a visit to Brother Zhang. Linya bowed and greeted, esteemed mortal, I pay my respects to you, Master Zhang. Zhang Yan replied gently, there is no need for such formalities, princess.
Please, come inside and have a seat. Once the three of them were settled, Zhang Yan straightforwardly asked, is there something you wish to discuss with me, princess?
Linya responded, I have heard that you have become an initiated disciple.
I am willing to offer 1,000 pounds of 5 elements divine sand. It will be delivered to your residence tomorrow. Upon hearing this, Zhang Yan couldn't help but be surprised.
He had only heard of treasures like 5 elements divine sand being traded by weight. This person was offering him 1,000 pounds right off the bat, but considering the vast territories of the nobility, such treasures might not hold much value to them. Linya continued, this year, the upper reaches of the Dragon River have frozen over, making it difficult to traverse.
Collecting divine materials is not easy, which is why I can only offer 1,000 pounds for now.
She anxiously added, in early spring next year, I will provide an additional 1,000 pounds, bringing the total to 2,000 pounds.
What does Mr. Zhang think of this?
Zhang Yan, with a serious expression, directly inquired, Princess, your politeness suggests that there is something you need assistance with.
Linya let out a long, heavy sigh before saying, to be honest with you, I've been entangled with a disciple from the Northern Divine Sect. This person is ruthless and unreasonable, and he actually wants to take me as a concubine.
Linya gently put forth her request, Wangshi, I cannot harm anyone from the sect of immortal cultivators, nor do I have any other options. If Mr. Zhang could become my protector, then that wicked person would definitely think twice before acting recklessly.
Zhang Yan thought for no more than 3 seconds before agreeing wholeheartedly, I see.
If Zhao's senior disciple is willing to intervene in this matter, then I shall agree. Linya immediately stood up to pay her respects, saying, Thank you, Mr. Zhang. If there is anything related to worldly matters in the future, feel free to command us.
Zhao Yuan, who was standing nearby, couldn't help but exclaim, Thank you, Mr. Zhang. After that, Zhang Yan stood up to see them off, not thinking much about it. Once everyone had left, La Ping emerged from the town and mocked, The disciple of the Bright Blade sect is truly impressive, just a single word can make the offspring of nobles and royals serve him. La Ping noticed Zhang Yan was silent and continued to tease him, Just wait until you enter the upper house, won't you then be able to command the city lords and emperors as you wish? Upon hearing this, Zhang Yan could only smile faintly, What you say, fellow cultivator, makes sense. La Ping felt her face flush at his words, This Zhang Yan really is polite, he even refers to himself as a fellow cultivator. Suddenly, La Ping seemed to remember something, right? Once the divine sand is offered to you, you can use it to trade for some herbs with your senior disciple. Zhang Yan exclaimed in surprise, Herbs? Does the fellow cultivator know how to refine elixirs?
Upon hearing this, La Ping looked up to the sky and replied, I can't refine high-grade elixirs, but I am very skilled at concocting healing and beneficial elixirs.
Zhang Yan casually asked, So the equipment used for elixir refining must be my cauldron, right?
La Ping climbed onto the edge of the cauldron and answered, Of course. But this cauldron is not made of copper, it is forged from the finest star sand long spear.
Zhang Yan was astonished and exclaimed, Isn't the star sand long spear one of the top-grade materials needed for weapon crafting?
La Ping glanced down at the bottom of the town and replied, The technique used by the cultivator to forge this cauldron is incredibly profound. If you hadn't refined it once, allowing me to feel the strange changes in the aura of this cauldron, I would never have been able to discern it. Zhang Yan began to speculate, realizing that only an ancient cultivator could afford to use star sand long spear to forge such a large cauldron. It seemed that Shi Jing was unaware of the origins of this cauldron, which was why he easily gifted it to him. Suddenly, La Ping looked into Zhang Yan's eyes and noticed a layer of sorrow on his face. He hurriedly spoke to comfort him, You don't need to be too heartbroken.
If I can refine healing elixirs, I can also provide you with even greater benefits.
The amount of elixirs you need to open your meridians is not a small number, I can help you with the refinement.
Zhang Yan waved his hand and laughed in response, What are you saying? Just take it and use it.
Zhang Yan then explained, I am about to reach the opening meridian stage. The urgent matter right now is to find a spiritual place to nurture the meridians of this mortal body. However, within the sect, there are more mouths than rice, and there aren't enough resources available, there's basically nowhere I can utilize.
I wonder if you, fellow cultivator La Ping, have any good insights?
La Ping answered without hesitation, The place where the spirit token grows must have a hollow chamber beneath it, which is where the Crown King resided. If we can absorb the true essence within, we will undoubtedly be able to cultivate a high-grade meridian. La Ping added, I can take you to find the Crown King, but you must swear that after you open your meridian, you will dissolve my bloodline essence and return my freedom to me. Zhang Yan agreed without a moment's hesitation, Alright, I'll wait until my cultivation level stabilizes, and then we can set off. A few days later, the mountain where Zhang Yan was located transitioned continuously between night and day, with the peak constantly shrouded in clouds of smoke and flames. La Ping was in the peak, diligently refining alchemical pills. Anyone who looked might have thought it was trying to cook itself. Zhang Yan remained seated in meditation, surrounded by numerous failed alchemical products. He tightly grasped the shattered jade and also held onto the profound primordial inner reflection mystical records. At the same time, in the world of shattered jade, he remained focused on cultivating the way. Suddenly, Zhang Yan's body emitted strange streams of light, and sweat was pouring down his face. After a while, Zhang Yan opened his eyes wide, the sweat on his forehead gradually turning red. In the shattered jade world, Zhang Yan suddenly collapsed, but his soul was still cultivating the way, slowly ascending with an abundance of spiritual energy. Zhang Yan had tossed the items into the storage, waiting for the day to be burned. The first secret method had been completed, containing countless dangers, resulting in his death 150 times. Zhang Yan finally managed to return to the real world. He couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief, his consciousness having flickered over 100 times in shattered jade, and he had finally found the correct cultivation method. Zhang Yan silently felt incredulous. No wonder La Ping had said that the profound primordial inner reflection mystical records were easily influenced by the heaven and earth. By the time he completed his training, he might have already reached the Grandmaster level in terms of burning out and possession. At this moment, his gaze rested on that peak.
Has the fire been extinguished? Zhang Yan approached and wondered.
La Ping borrowed his guardian jade cauldron to refine pills, potions, and spells, claiming it was very dangerous.
It had been a long time without any news. Could it be that he had perished inside the cauldron? Out of curiosity, Zhang Yan opened the lid to look inside, but before he could see anything, he was interrupted by someone outside the door.
Zhang Yan, are you there?
Come out and talk.
Zhang Yan felt anxious and uneasy.
Could it be that Ning Songxian had discovered La Ping's situation?
Despite his worries, he had no choice but to open the door, otherwise, he would raise even more suspicion. Ning Songxian stood outside, his entire being radiating spiritual energy, exuding a formidable presence.
Zhang Yan bowed his head and greeted, Ning's senior disciple.
Ning Songxian patted his shoulder and then made a serious expression, this is not a suitable place to talk, follow me. After that, Ning Songxian took Zhang Yan flying off to an unknown location, and they both landed on a high cliff far from the mountain below.
Zhang Yan remained silent, waiting for the other to speak, unsure of what could be so serious.
Ning Songxian suddenly praised, Zhang brother, you are truly composed, very good. One who cultivates the way must rid themselves of all distractions, leaving only their true self. It is important to understand that the obstacles and illusions arise from the mind. If the mind is not steady, then the spirit cannot emerge. Zhang Yan bowed his head in response, thank you very much, senior disciple, for your guidance. He secretly wondered if Ning Songxian wanted to take this opportunity to test whether his cultivation ability was solid. Ning Songxian turned his face outward and began to speak, I have searched the mountains for many days without discovering any trace of the snake monster. It is likely that it either perished from its injuries or found a place to hide. Ning Songxian continued, in the coming days, I must return to the sect and cannot pay attention to these matters. To guard against the snake monster harming you, I will give you something, this will protect your life. Zhang Yan quickly accepted it, though he did not understand what it was. Ning Songxian raised his voice again, go now, and remember to maintain your true heart. Both you and I come from Cold Gate, which can be considered as a fateful connection. Before taking off, Ning Songxian said, in the future, if there is an opportunity, I will introduce you to a certain immortal. A wisp of white smoke suddenly enveloped Zhang Yan's body, causing him to hover in the air, and then his body automatically transported him back home. After flying for a short while, Zhang Yan found himself stopping in front of his house. As he looked up, he saw Ning Songxian beginning to depart. Deep in his heart, Zhang Yan thought, I will remember this kindness. While Zhang Yan was busy conversing with Ning Songxian from afar, the lid of the jade chamber was now opened. La Ping slowly poked her head out, inhaling the smoke that was spreading everywhere. La Ping crawled down to the ground, and her entire body suddenly flashed with a purple light. She felt secretly delighted. After going through the three-step medicine refining technique, she could finally take on human form. A vague human figure began to materialize in the midst of the smoke, revealing that it was none other than snake monster La Ping. When she transformed into a human, she possessed an enchanting beauty that could easily captivate anyone. At that moment, La Ping suddenly heard strange rustling noises from outside. Lin Tong peeked his head inside the house, calculating that in order to secure a spot as a disciple in the lower house, he needed to obtain the guardian jade cauldron for exchange. Lin Tong thought to himself that since Zhang Yan was not here, it was the perfect opportunity to seize the moment. The door was wide open and there was no one inside, which fueled his bold idea. Before Lin Tong could take any further action, La Ping stood with her hands on her hips and questioned, who are you? Lin Tong was caught off guard and blurted out, isn't it true that Zhang Yan doesn't have a servant to attend to him?
But upon seeing La Ping's exquisite face, Lin Tong quickly adopted a lecherous expression and said, "So you're Zhang Yan's maid, a little beauty like you must want to come with me?" He hadn't finished his sentence when La Ping glared at him, her voice cold and threatening. "Do you want to die?" What followed was Lin Tong's shrill scream as Xiao delivered a punishing blow. A little while later, Zhang Yan slowly returned home. He noticed nothing suspicious. Suddenly, La Ping stepped in front of Zhang Yan, presenting herself in a demure manner. La Ping stepped forward to embrace Zhang Yan's arm, sobbing theatrically, "After many years of searching, I have finally found you, my lord." Zhang Yan glanced at her briefly, irritation flashing in his eyes, and then without hesitation, he shook her hand off, leaving her taken aback. When he turned to walk away, showing no curiosity about who she was, La Ping felt even more disappointed. She ran up to him again, wrapping her arms around Zhang Yan. "Have you forgotten me, young Master Zhang?" La Ping's soft chest pressed, whether intentionally or not, against Zhang Yan's back, causing him to swallow hard. What a feeling it was! Finally, Zhang Yan spoke up coldly, "Fellow cultivator La, why do you have to act like this? We share a room every day, how could we not know each other?" Seeing that his trick had been exposed, La Ping immediately stepped back, secretly cursing, "Damn it! I forgot that this little thief could distinguish the aura." La Ping sulkily shouted, "Oh! Spending every day in the same room as you, don't you dare recklessly tarnish my purity." Zhang Yan eagerly chimed in, exactly, fellow cultivator La, the grievances have piled up." Congratulations, La Ping continued, crossing her arms. "For now, I can only take on a form, cultivation must be slowly restored." Without hesitation, Zhang Yan called her out, "If your cultivation hasn't recovered, then how do you explain the name in the cauldron?" It turned out that Lin Tong had been thrown into the town by La Ping, hanging on by a thread. La Ping seriously explained, "This little brat, as soon as you left earlier, tried to sneak in here to steal the cauldron and was subsequently caught by me." Zhang Yan was surprised to hear this, stealing the cauldron? Upon looking inside, Zhang Yan realized that the person in question was Lin Tong, while La Ping beside him was full of herself, eagerly waiting for compliments. At that moment, another group of people began to approach from outside. Zhang Yan and La Ping exchanged nods, signaling each other to prepare for another act. La Ping quickly hid behind the door, waiting for the group to enter. Zhang Yan stepped forward and asked, "Who are you?" The old man replied sternly, "Zhang Yan, I am the steward of the lower house. Today, the chief disciple Du of the lower house has summoned all disciples to the main hall for a meeting. Everyone else is going, why do you not come?" The steward, hiding a bright ruler behind his back, shouted loudly, "I have come on the orders of the young master to demand an explanation from you. Hurry up and kneel down." Upon hearing this, Zhang Yan had several thoughts. Du, the senior disciple of the lower house, had changed. It seemed he was a newly appointed official trying to establish his authority. With no backing, he was being used as a pawn. Zhang Yan also wanted to see what would happen, so he slowly knelt down on the ground and said, "Regardless of whether I am guilty or innocent, as a newly admitted disciple, you, merely a servant, dare to come and arrest me." The steward brandished the ruler to intimidate him and said, "Enough with the nonsense. Are you going to tie your own hands, or shall I do it for you?" Frustrated, Zhang Yan broke out in a cold sweat. He was a bit taken aback. This ruler was no ordinary object. Zhang Yan secretly took it out from his sleeve and thought to himself, he wasn't sure if the pearl that senior disciple Ning had given him would be of any use. The steward raised the ruler high and shouted, "This is what you wanted for yourself." However, just as he was about to use this move to strike Zhang Yan, La Ping's hand stopped him. La Ping easily snatched the ruler from the steward's hand and laughed joyfully. The steward, furious, yelled, "You little wench, I am the steward of the Du family, return my magical artifact to me at once." La Ping stuck out his tongue and teased him, saying, "Your lowly crafted magical tool dares to be called a magical artifact?" Sighing, "This snake monster girl is acting too convincingly." After that, he stood up abruptly and kicked the steward out. The steward, in front of everyone, was screaming as if he were being bullied, making anyone who looked on think he was truly being mistreated. The steward was helped back by two men beside him, not forgetting to turn around and scold him. "Zhang Yan, how dare you be so arrogant, just wait for your doom. La Ping was currently having a great time playing with the ruler, as if it were the first time she had seen it. Suddenly, La Ping came up with a new idea. She stepped forward, grabbed Lin Tong by the collar, and then began to sneakily stuff a magical artifact into his pocket. Zhang Yan curiously asked, "What are you doing?" La Ping replied with a smile, "If I guess correctly, this technique should have a pair, so just sit back and wait for the show." A little while later, in the lower house hall, the steward, who had just been helped back, knelt down and did not dare to raise his head. The young master, who had calmed down, was Old Servant. Old Servant had carelessly allowed Zhang Yan to take the magical artifact. The young man sitting in the middle of the house, after hearing these words, raised his voice and shouted, "Nonsense! Zhang Yan is clearly just a monk from the mystical bamboo realm. This person is Duyu, the great disciple of the lower house. My magical artifact could easily defeat even a low-grade spirit weapon, so how could he possibly take it from me?" Duyu frowned and muttered, "Trash, losing a magical artifact, what benefit do you have now?" After saying this, he swiftly struck with a blade, severing the head of the old steward before he could even blink. Everyone present in the grand hall gasped in shock. There was another magical artifact similar to the one before, and its power was truly formidable. Duyu slowly moved his hands in a peculiar manner. His hands suddenly began to glow. However, right after that, Duyu frowned in confusion. Strangely, the magical artifact did not respond. It seemed that it was indeed held by Zhang Yan and could not escape. Duyu took out the other ruler and laughed loudly. "Zhang Yan, do you think my magical artifact is so easy to take?" He quickly ordered the magical treasure to search for the other half, which was in Zhang Yan's possession. 15 minutes later, both rulers stopped in Duyu's hands, not missing one. Duyu loudly commanded, "You all carry Zhang Yan's corpse in here?" Then he turned around and said loudly, "Dear junior disciples, wait a moment. If Zhang Yan is so arrogant, as the senior disciple of the lower house, I will definitely make proper arrangements." The disciples exchanged puzzled glances, unsure whether to believe Duyu's words or not. Half an hour later, just as two subordinates reached the doorway, they announced loudly, "Young master, we have brought Zhang Yan here." Duyu's face lit up with joy as he exclaimed, "Where is he? Bring Zhang Yan's body here." Deep down, he was immensely pleased with himself. He couldn't wait for these people to see Zhang Yan's corpse. Surely, they would be in awe of his cunning methods. A body was placed on a stretcher, and the subordinates carried it inside. Unfortunately, the person lying there was Lin Tong, not Zhang Yan. The disciples, having never seen Zhang Yan's face, were easily fooled. What a pity! Zhang Yan was a talented individual. Oh dear, what bad luck! Duyu, upon seeing this person for the first time, exclaimed excitedly, "Is this really Zhang Yan?" However, Zhang Yan stepped in from outside and said, "No, I am Zhang Yan." He walked inside and explained everything. The one who had been struck was Lin Tong, the cousin of Lin Yuan, a senior disciple. Duyu began to feel confused. "So you are Zhang Yan?" Internally, he cursed himself, while outwardly he fumbled his words twice in succession. Upon hearing the news, Lin Yuan hurriedly sat down beside his younger brother and asked, "Zhang Yan, what on earth happened?" Zhang Yan said nothing, he just bowed in respect to Duyu. After glancing at the steward and observing the old man's peculiar hair, Zhang Yan held him in high regard. Duyu's ruthless actions clearly marked him as no ordinary person, and Zhang Yan realized he could not act thoughtlessly.